You remember John Ritter?
Yes.
From Three's Company?
Sure.
Died of a...
I worked with him.
Ruptured... Oh, you did?
Yeah, did an episode of News Radio with him. Super nice guy.
Good guy? Yeah, I
Great
got that
guy.
impression. Anyway, he died of a ruptured aorta, if I remember correctly, long before there was COVID vaccines.
Right.
So the point is, if that had happened last year,
right,
we'd all be saying, come on.
Of course.
He's in Hollywood, he got vaxxed, and now look at him.
Yep.
So it happens.
100%.
Right? But the rate at which it's happening has changed radically.
Exactly.
And the very people who say, oh, that's not the vaccine, are very uninterested in figuring out what it is. So, let's put two and two together.
Well, they don't even want to consider the vaccine, which is so crazy. If you called it anything else, if it wasn't called the vaccine, if it wasn't for COVID, okay, because COVID became so politicized, and it was like culturally so polarizing. Let's pretend it was for something else. And there was some medication, and the people that were taking that medication were dropping like flies. They would 100% make a correlation, and they would make it publicly, and it would be in the news. Of course, it might not actually be in the news today, because this is part of the problem with what we're dealing with advertising and the media, is that there's so much revenue that comes from pharmaceutical drug companies that there's just a reality about them reluctant to print or put any stories on television that are negative. There's too much money involved.
Right. There's too much money involved, and it becomes impossible to override this narrative. The narrative takes on a reality of its own, even though it is contradicted by the facts. And our scientific tools they're tremendously powerful at discovering patterns like this. It's not difficult to do,
right,
and yet we deliberately avoid using them in the ways that they were intended.
Do you think in the future we'll look back on this and there'll be some sort of a shift in the way we discuss it? There's a lot of things in history that during the time where they were happening, I'm sure people were all like the McCarthy era. I'm sure people thought it was very important to root out these communists, but they didn't exactly understand. Like, hey, you're calling a lot of people communists that aren't even communists. You're going after people that just went to meetings to find out what's going on. The world didn't exactly understand what that even meant back then. We look back at it now, the Red Scare is like a negative thing. It's a dangerous sort of negative aspect of our history.
Yeah, although... I'm sure you're having the same experience where lots of stuff that you learned as a clear narrative, like, the Red Scare took over people and it was like a witch hunt. And the answer is actually more nuanced than that. There was more truth to it than I was taught, right? The Rosenbergs really were guilty of passing secrets to the Russians.
Oh, yeah, there definitely was a lot of that.
So, it's a mixed story.
Right.
You asked the question, though, if in the future we're going to have a different conversation about what's taking place. And I just want to put a little placeholder there. The answer kind of depends if there is a future. And I worry a lot that not only are we headed into chaos, but that we are going to be denied the ability to have a proper historical account of the present, that we're never going to understand what these stories were doing, why they played out the way they did, why people disappeared when they did, and that's not healthy. You need to be able to create a record. It's never going to be perfect, but you need to be able to create a record of what took place that has been exposed to some kind of analytical standard so that you can correct your course. If you don't know what happened, you can't improve on your thought process going forward. And that's extremely dangerous. It's like, flying with a blindfold.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I'm glad you did point out the fact that there were really things. The Red Scare is a weird example because people would like to kind of dismiss the impact that the communists, especially Russia, was having on our government. And there was a pretty big impact. I mean, they did steal the plans for the nuclear bomb. There's a lot of shit that happened because of actual communist interference. But the narrative when I was in high school was that the Red Scare was bad. Right? It was like everybody went crazy and they were all looking for, which was true too. But that's part of the problem when you don't know. Like back then, no internet, very little paper trail. It's really hard to find out who's talking to who unless you get an actual listening device in the room and capture them talking.
Yeah, we can't know, and it's important to get your comeuppance on these stories. You grow up comfortable that you understand what happened during the Red Scare, and
Right.
then one day you're doing a little reading and you discover the story just isn't the one you were taught. And the more stories you dig into, the more frequently that happens.
Well, if you just get one good one, you're hooked. For me, it was the Kennedy assassination.
Mm-hmm.
One good book on the Kennedy assassination, I was like, God damn it, they killed the fucking president. It freaked me out forever. That was like, I literally had a giant shift in how I viewed the world after reading that book. Because before that, I was never a questioner of whatever was in the news or whatever the narrative was that we were being told about anything.
Well, but I mean, I have exactly the same reaction to that story, and I've been down that rabbit hole. And I think you're just ultimately left with a question. Something happened in 1963. That's before either of us were born, right?
Right.
That thing was either an anomaly that robbed the nation of a president, and the nation continued to be a democratic republic in the aftermath of it, or that was interference with democracy, and we don't know how to look at all of the seemingly democratic things that have happened since. How much of what has happened since are the people who took control with that assassination? How much is them continuing to maintain control with a certain amount of democracy? And how much was that an aberration that then returned us to our normal course? And
That's a good point. A certain amount of democracy.
a certain amount. There's clearly a certain amount.
Yeah.